right. This is the Real Ramble, number 5. I'm Mount Lake Moose, and today I'm talking with Mark, and we're going to be discussing social justice and associated topics. Do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Okay. So, I guess the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically about this is I think once we got past our knee-jerk reactions to what each other were saying about this topic, we got to somewhere productive. And I think, well, I would definitely not label you a social justice warrior by any means. I think you can speak to some of the underpinnings of, or the why of what they're doing in a way that I found very useful and was able to hear and yeah.
Well, thank you. The intent of many of the social justice agendas, activities, areas of concern cover the entire map. And again, it is, I think your term knee-jerk is very important in the sense that if you throw out a label, both sides, and it's much more than both sides, but that somehow one is supposed to agree with feminism or racism as to be something against. Well, I don't necessarily disagree in some theoretical framework till you actually put context around it, till you actually say, what are we talking about? And indeed, what type of outcome are we looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, so much of it is overwhelmingly, do we have greater humanity in how we deal with ourselves and with others and with systems and the world, for that matter? If that is the movement we're going to, which is often incredibly complex,
Yeah.
then I'm good with it. But if I'm working with in essence, an acronym,
Mm-hmm.
and that level of relating to the issue, I don't have a ton of patience for it.
Okay. I think that is definitely where much of the, I wouldn't even call it discourse, the yelling at each other around this from opposing sides does become just a slinging of labels and virtue signaling competition.
And I find that process to be painful. So I don't generally, in fact, I almost never connect with that. And if I'm helping with an activity or an organization, et cetera, with that, setting the framework, I call them containers, but setting it so that the outcomes are valuable for the people who are involved in it,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the kind of dog and pony show that both
Okay.
sides might be
Mm-hmm.
playing with. That, again, is very angering and frustrating for me.
Okay. And yeah, we talked a little before we started here to set some context and whatnot. And I think what you're alluding to there is what maybe you would call a safe space, where, and in that framework, I would agree. I think what I call it creating the proper context for your goals, for a meeting or
Well, let me
gathering of any kind, really.
let me generalize a little bit to that. Is that, and ideally this conversation will be along those lines, is that I see these as education steps.
Okay.
Now, I have certain meanings with that probably aren't as understood or agreed upon as everyone else. But in the learning, growth, and development of individuals partaking in that process, within that, it's incredibly hard to do that if people are polarized, feel threatened, are trying to win.
Mm-hmm.
None of that produces the type of development and interpersonal growth and education that resonates with me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's definitely the I find myself doing that sometimes, and it's definitely something I try to avoid. And like we, again, calling back to earlier, speaking about like principles and values, that I do try and hold free speech as an almost inviolable right, short of, the normal, you can't threaten people or calls to violence and such, but it should be as absolute as practicable. And I think that leads me to try or aspire to be as charitable in interpretations of other people's words as I can.
Well, I think that's a good process. While, again, just, somewhat within the framework that we're talking, the term free speech, if that is meant to be, and you are not meaning it this way, I'm sort of establishing some boundaries.
Okay.
Free speech does not mean you can say anything you want. As you indicated, if there's a threat involved, then that's no longer free speech. It's something else.
Yeah, though I'd toe right to that line. Like you can't say, I'm going to kill you, or, hey, you guy in the audience, go kill that person. But you can say, man, wouldn't it be like a better world if that person wasn't around anymore? That's towing that line.
Okay. And in that case, that moves into an unsafe context unless you and the person that you are engaging with, or the people that you're engaging, all have the same understanding. Because that is theoretically or philosophically not well, one could argue in the way you have.
Yeah.
But the reality is that people's reaction to that, you have now crossed the line. And it may not be your line, but it may be their line. And the fact is, these lines are not only difficult to get on the same page with, they fluctuate. You may find that a line like this, if you're talking about mowing your lawn, you could say, wow, I wish that neighbor wasn't here, and somebody, and you know what, that's not quite the line cross. That if you moved into LGBTQ issues, if you moved into racism issues, that feeling of threat is no longer the same message.
Okay.
So to take it out of context and say, wait a second, we can kind of, as long as I don't say you should, something should happen to you right now, but sort of implied that, unless we have agreements on that.
Yeah.
Now, also, we can have great conversations without moving close to that line.
Sure.
So, but I am trying to indicate that
one
has to have the awareness that line changes and the conversation.
And here's, I think, in normal conversation, or whether you're judging whether somebody's a good person, absolutely, that moves all over the place. But when you get into defining it under the law, you can acknowledge that there's difference there. But if you're going to treat it differently under the law, you have to explain the process by which that differentiation is made.
So you've jumped into a different context completely.
Yeah.
That if
I acknowledge your context fully, like as I was saying, as a value judgment, or whether, the opinion, or whether that is a good person, or whether you label them an asshole or not, all fine.
No, actually, though those were all parts of it, is that the foundational is that can we have a constructive, productive conversation? When you start saying, okay, wait a second, you're going to set some guidelines, and and the guideline that you did, I thought had some potential for threat into it.
Yeah.
And you're indicating, well, for me, in your case, I can go up to that point. You know what? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But that doesn't mean the person you're talking to can go up to that line. And so if you can go up that line, but they can't, and be all good with it, then the space that you're creating is readily compromised, and polarization will happen. If you come back and say, wait a second, we're going to do it by the law, then you've changed context completely.
Okay, so I would completely concede that the person doing that, especially if they're aware of their audience's inability to get to that level, has completely not created a safe space, has created the inverse of a safe space, and is leveraging it for an agenda.
Exactly.
But where I would draw the line is for me to believe that they have legitimately committed a crime, there needs to be a mechanism that is robust and generalizable, that differentiates that speech from the noisy neighbor. Wouldn't it be better if he wasn't there?
And I agree. It's just that now is that there is a critical difference between having what we're terming a safe space and a commitment of crime. You
Yeah.
may, in fact, the criteria for the two are not remotely the same. So I agree. I didn't go anywhere close to a crime.
Yeah.
I'm staying within the context
Okay.
of can we have a constructive conversation.
Okay. And this is actually something we bumped on earlier around like words with power or words that shouldn't be used in, the N word, whatever. I feel like that we're getting more words are being attempted to be added to that list, largely from what I would, for lack of a better term or more accurate term, call SJWs. That, oh, that person's a Nazi. It's okay to punch a Nazi. So I've now applied a label to somebody who, and by my own reckoning, that label, if they're wearing it, justifies violence against them. And it's like, but you can't do that all in your own head or even within your own group. You can't make those type of decisions. And it's, Nazi is the most extreme and would get the most buy-in, but racist, misogynist, all these other terms, there's some subset that feels that they justify violence. And that is kind of an aspect of, like, when we were talking before, you're talking about the anarchists and the use of violence, that the Antifa people who are supposedly fighting fascists look a lot more like the black shirts in Weimar and whatnot than the right wingers do. I mean, even the Trump supporters, when you have, it's being framed as so you have the anti-fascists versus the Trump supporters, and the Trump supporters call themselves free speech. And yeah, some of them are hateful, awful people. But even when the white supremacist standing up there acknowledging the black guy in the back's right to talk, that to me is kind of a warning that you're on the wrong side of something if the white supremacist sounds more reasonable than you do.
Well, one could argue, that
And Berkeley specifically is the area where I'm thinking of is the riots and stuff down there.
I'm not familiar enough and specific, and
I think there was one in Portland as well.
I simply don't have the context and sufficient to be able to respond to that. I have a little resistance to, in general, generalizations on these matters, and that, but I can't speak to it.
Okay. Well, and it's much more pervasive than that at a more mild level. You have, and if you really want, we could pull up hours of video on it of every time, well, not every time, many times when men's rights activists or anyone perceived as being within that sphere by, again, SJWs, they're attacked. Their events are protested. Their very right to speak is denied or attempt to be invalidated by labeling it as hate speech or whatever else. And it's kind of like, the number of people on the left I've heard say hate speech isn't constitutionally protected. It's like, yes, it is. It's bad, but it is protected. And again, we get into that, what is the mechanism that differentiates what's hate speech and what's not? People use slippery slope arguments all the time, but I feel this one is somewhat legitimate because it's whoever's in power has their list of words you're not allowed to use or labels that if you wear, you're an enemy, and it can shift and move. And why put those mechanisms in place? Better everybody just live and let live and grow a thicker skin is a much more sustainable in the long term way to conduct ourselves. I would offer.
Well, I didn't relate much to most of what you just said till the very end.
Okay.
When you said, "Why don't we grow a thicker skin on this?" Again, not relating to the specifics of the men's rights or back and forth.
That was just an example.
And again, but the issue of vulnerability, of feeling threatened, and being able to move through that, is a human dynamic that I value.
Okay. And I would say most SJWs do not.
And
They want to hang on that precipice and leverage it for power.
okay, and so again, I have no comment or thought or even on this, since political spheres, where I think most of your observations are occurring, perhaps not, but I have no issue.
Well,
I
this
have
stuff
no,
specifically, it's YouTube and college campuses in general.
I'll give you an example that you might like. So, once upon a time, like a year ago, there was a campus that I'm familiar with was having some demonstrations, and
Okay, that's like half of them. So
pretty much I'm being fairly generic.
yeah.
And the police commissioner happened to be in a classroom that I happened to be in, and
Of the college or the city?
of the college.
Okay.
And so some students came in to protest of this. And it got handled. It wasn't overly dramatic in any sense of anything. And it was interesting, if you will. I'm somewhat of a participant, somewhat of an observer
Okay.
to all of this. And I didn't think any of it was done particularly well on any side on that matter.
That's like 45% of
Well, and
This
I
is
thought the
a common
police,
story.
the police commissioner was clearly more articulate than the, and everybody gave space to everybody, and that's all polite. So I was, oh, this is going to be a polite thing. Good, I can stay. There's no violence. It's all going to be polite. So I'm good with that.
No shoes being thrown.
No, no, vulgar, bad things. So the atmosphere was again very polite. And I thought, wow, the police chief and their cohort of some of their staff were there, and were very articulate in how they were addressing things. And I go, wow, you're so lucky. Someone, I'm thinking of them, that no one here really is paying attention and able to articulate, because they could identify some of the gaps in some of your very well articulated statements.
Okay.
But none of the protesters were apparently ready to zone in quite that much, and they were using good crowd control stuff. So when they started getting all leverage, they just agreed and rolled, did the jujitsu thing, and I thought, this is all good. You need to have those skills. Then I talked to some of the protesters afterwards, and actually talked about something that I have some background in, and on implicit bias,
Okay.
which was part of some of the dialogue. And these happened to be Caucasians, so it wasn't by any means all Caucasians in the group. And I said, so how do you fix that? And he says, well, I recognize it now. I says, well, that's so what? How do you fix it? And I get this blank stare. And it was a matter of implicit bias, that you acknowledge it exists. That's nice. But it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't make you unimplicitly biased. Simply
Shouldn't
by
it kind of like inform the handicap or whatever of how you interact with, or I don't know.
Believe it or not, it's much more difficult than that.
Okay.
You have to practice, you have to build awareness, you have to build replication, you actually have to develop counter skills. So simply the cognition that it exists is like, so what? It's better than not having it, but as far as it actually impacting how you operate and how it operates in the world, no, that's an idiotic position that almost everyone has.
You've identified the problem but not done anything to remedy it.
That's exactly the point.
Okay.
That somehow that you're conscious that it exists, fixed it, but you're not doing the actual work that's required,
Now this
which
is
requires vulnerability, which requires application and review, etc. Now, granted that the protesting side is usually a little more open to doing that theoretically, as opposed to arguing whether it even
Okay.
exists or not.
I see a very strong parallel on the protester side too.
Keep going.
That, well, that there's a lot of what I would call cultural Marxism going on.
You'll have to define that for me.
The basing of using group identity largely around race or sexual preference or gender identity or whatever as a class in a Marxist sense.
You're gonna keep going, because that could mean a ton of things. So I'm not quite clear
Well,
what you're trying to achieve here.
It's a type of thing that lets a son of a millionaire who happens to be black be one of the center points of that protest in Missouri, standing there chanting, quotes from the Communist Manifesto and diving in front of the car of the president so he could say that they tried to run him over. And, because he's a member of an oppressed class because he's black by definition. And it's kind of like, and to go back to what you're saying of identifying the problem and not doing anything of the solution, I think that's what Marxism is as a whole overall. I think the Communist Manifesto is a pretty good critique of capitalism, especially as it existed in Marx's time. Just his potential and offered solutions are run so fundamentally contradictory to human nature as to be untenable. And so I see the SJWs as doubling down on that, because not only are they doing a flawed ideology, but they're misapplying economic classes to cultural groups.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily argue about the economic stuff. I'm not sure I understood your point or what.
Okay.
So you have a son of a very wealthy family who's black. They have, by the nature in their mind, by being black, in their mind, say, therefore they are representative of the oppressed nature of blacks, which somehow, I guess, justifies something about throwing themselves in front of a car.
Have you not seen that video?
I haven't seen that
Oh,
video.
man. I could find it if you want to see it.
I don't want to see it.
Okay. Basically, there was like a parade or type thing going on, and the president's car was trying to, move along. Or maybe it was just a protest and they blocked the road. I'm not sure exactly. And they have a number of people, some staff or security or whatever, trying to hold it and just move them so they can get the car out of there.
Sure.
And the car goes to drive around one of these security guys. And this guy was Butler, I think his name was. I forget. Basically dives in front and steps in front, and the car bumps him. Basically, because it's moving at like 2 miles an hour, if that. And then in their rhetoric and their presented written statements of demands that the president resign and all these other litany of things, they present it as if the president tried to run them down. And they're doing all this while chanting lines from the Communist Manifesto. And it's just kind of like, wow, can you do more things to put me not on your side? You're being disingenuous. You're spouting provenly flawed ideologies.
So the purpose of that activity, looking at charitably, as you started, possibly, of this young man, I assume young man, who doesn't sound like he threw himself in front of the car. It sounds like he nudged himself in front of the car.
He basically stepped in front of a car moving at a mile an hour.
Right. So this is not high risk territory. No. Okay. So what was...
It was presented as an attempt on his life.
Well, hold on. Again, I fortunately have had no connection in any fashion with this. Okay. Thank goodness. But let's just take it from that point on. So he's managed to get through the line, security, et cetera, gets into to get nudged by a 1 mile an hour car. Okay. Why did he do that?
Well, he obviously felt justified. It feels like an ends justifies the means type situation.
Possibly, but let's make this real simple. Why did he do it? What was he looking for?
Attention.
Of course. And so he's trying to get attention, but let's put that now within his context. What type of attention is he trying to get? He's trying to get media attention. He's trying to get publicity.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, would anybody argue that this is a publicity stunt?
They might argue it, but...
No, I don't even think they would argue it.
I would find that a very interesting question, actually, to know whether they thought it was or not.
It's clearly... Now, they may not be... They, whoever they... The stunt component has a judgment into it. But that it is a publicity activity to draw attention, I find it difficult to believe, first of all, anyone would disagree in the way you have framed it, that it was there. If they did disagree with that, then I would sit there and go, there's not much reason for us to have much more conversation. If your agenda is to create a dialogue within only your framework, then in that case, I would agree with you that I don't care which side does that.
Okay.
That is not anything that what we're trying to attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that isn't to say that some of those attempts are not worthwhile to be done, given social norm, given social backgrounds, given all that kind of stuff. You have not convinced me, and you're not trying to,
Yeah.
that this was one of those cases.
Okay.
That you, and this is gets to the fundamental point, is the condition of blacks within that context such that it justifies. You know what? I can't speak to that, though I have some sympathy for that position. I do not have sympathy for the position in this fashion, in the way you have framed this, to say, okay, I'm going to go do this and then create a false narrative to draw. Now we're starting to get into some problems.
Well, everything is narratives now.
And what we are indicating in this conversation is not what we're doing.
No, I'm.
That's not what we're doing.
No, I am trying to do exactly the opposite. Yeah, to get, to talk about the fundamental principles and underpinnings of
If in
what
fact,
and why we believe what we believe.
if there was somebody, and this is, I'm probably going to regret this because this is a little bit off the top of my head.
Okay.
If in fact you have some National Guard who are shooting into the crowd, and
Like
somebody,
Kent State situation.
yes,
Okay.
and in fact you have somebody like this young man jump in front of the car of the president to draw attention to what is going on around them, to try to stop and bring awareness to it, I would judge that situation completely different. While the false narrative is still in existence, the greater what's going on here, I have some belief that you got to take that into account. Nothing that you've indicated in this discussion brings it to that level of play. I haven't gotten past, I don't know enough of the situation.
Okay.
And nothing that you've shown me in follow-up. But in fact, if I see people at great risk and someone's done a publicity stunt to get people that to the framework, that you can start arguing, saying, well, there are great risks within the police force, but and all that kind of stuff. This is
So
more difficult to kind of.
did you follow any of the stuff going on at Mizzou? What was it, a year ago or a little more?
I read some of it, but unfortunately, the reporting on it was either superficial, was
Yeah.
knee-jerk, that on all sides.
Yeah.
On this, I'm sitting there reading this and jumping to conclusions on this.
Well, not to try and shield the platform we're on at the moment, but like YouTube, it's more effort to find stuff potentially, but there's so much unfiltered, both reporting and commentary available just out there. You have to dig for it. But it's all out there, and it doesn't give you a perfect picture, but it doesn't give you the exact picture that corporate overlords of whichever news corp want you
That
to
I
have.
believe that academic institutions are overwhelmingly racist in many ways. That do they get it type of thing? I think in many ways they do not. That
I think we need to unpack that a little.
well, let me.
Okay.
That this situation. This was the football team.
The football team was involved. Yeah, they signed on and were demanding that's what. It's funny. That's what made anything happen.
I know. Is that? Yeah, you got to sit there and go, boy, talk about a weird situation. All the.
But this is also the one where the communications professor was kicking the journalists out of the safe space and calling for muscle.
Yes.
Yes, Melissa Glick, whatever. She got fired.
Yeah. So you're sitting there, kind of going. So
have you lost the plot so badly? It's like you're a journalist, you're a communications professor.
I looked at this and it was sort of like I couldn't find anything that interested me enough in a sense of this is sensationalized in everything that I saw.
Oh, it completely was. But there are fundamental.
There are, however, to engage on a theoretical overview sort of thing is this is not one of those things that I was going to spend a lot of my time and energy on, because it was an entertainment thing. And I don't want to minimize, and it's almost impossible not to, some real human
Mm-hmm.
suffering that is in there. I just, what I saw was like, you know what, this isn't working for me.
Mm.
And so I did not delve into it on that. That's, whereas if I see true suffering
Mm-hmm.
that's in, then that's another matter. I'm
Okay.
not trying to say there wasn't any there. I'm just saying what I saw
Okay.
was,
So I think this kind of speaks to that difference of perspective that we touched on before we started. That you're looking at it from a very humanistic,
I am
and I'm looking at a more,
very personal way.
yeah, and I'm looking at a more structural, historical point of view.
Yeah.
And I guess that precedents are being set there. So it's like, oh, so if a very vocal minority can jump up and down loud enough and convince the football team, then you can fire any university president. It's like,
Well,
ooh.
the question becomes, the only interesting question on that
Hmm.
is whether that's a good idea or not.
I would say it could be or couldn't be, but that these people were jumping to conclusions. Like look at Evergreen State just this last week. That they, if you looked at George Bridges' CV, I don't think there's very many people, objective people, who would say that he is not a friend of social justice and a good, true liberal and progressive. And yet they are swearing at him, telling him to fuck off, just awful, and not even listening to a word he has to say, accusing him of being threatening because he's talking with his hands at a podium 20 feet away from anybody. It's like, you people are Looney Tunes. I'm sorry, and you're not doing your side any good. Like the Kathy Griffin thing. Oh, it's art. I cut off the sitting president's head and put a photo on. No, it was, even if it is art, it's not in good taste. And all you did was give so much fuel to the people you're trying to, because even liberals are like, dude, you can't cut off the head of the
So
president.
if we're going to um, discuss pros and cons of the media
Mm-hmm.
and that type of whatever, I'm not the right person to be chatting with.
Okay, and that's fine. But the I'm just kind of aghast that, I mean, I remember seeing it in friends in high school or what, people who just like get into huge swearing,
Yeah,
vicious
yeah.
arguments with their parents, and it's just like so beyond any context that I even really knew existed outside of television or something, that it was just kind of like, I don't know how to handle it. And that level of uninformed disrespect. I mean, if there was truly a hateful
Okay, so
person,
hang on a sec. So let's take a
you're
look at that.
attacking an ally, really.
So take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
So unpacking that, if you
Yeah,
will,
yeah,
a
that's
little
fine.
bit. So let me make sure, because I want to go into this carefully.
Okay.
So what you just said, in high school, you observed a fellow high school student
Mm-hmm.
just go off on their parents
Mm-hmm.
in a vicious, derogatory, demeaning
Mm-hmm.
diatribe.
Yeah.
What was the parents' response?
Not as vicious a return, but a level of energy and derogatory type stuff back that was outside the norm, probably
So
to a half as far
great,
as the
great,
kid.
great. Okay, so what was wrong with that?
I don't know. I was just highly uncomfortable. I mean,
Okay, so that's a good
it's
thing. That's
dysfunctional.
well, that's doesn't say anything.
All
But the
right.
fact that you're uncomfortable, good stuff. That
Mm-hmm.
thank goodness on that. I support that.
Yeah.
But what's wrong with it?
In
And
what
so
type
this
of
is
context
this
are you?
is well, this is a co-student,
Mm-hmm.
a neighborhood thing. So at that context, what is the human thing wrong with this?
I mean, lots. I mean,
Because they're arguing the wrong point, is where I'm heading
oh,
with
okay.
this. Because if I'm sitting there and you're my parent
Mm-hmm.
and I do this really vicious, problematic, and uninformed on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know what was on the other side of it, but we can kind of assume by the way you're framing it that the parents didn't come home and try to force feed something to this kid. You know, what started this discussion.
Oh, I definitely got the sense that this was an argument that was long-ranging and started probably years ago.
Possibly so. So the point is, what is the actual problem here? This is a relationship problem,
Yeah. And the root, I don't know.
and without knowing the root, we know at least that there is a mutual respect problem.
Yes.
Okay, one of the most disastrous things all around us is a lack of mutual respect, a respect problem. And many of these issues cannot be addressed in the way that I wish to address them and I wish to see them without a degree of respect. That's what we're trying to replicate here on this. So that if it doesn't have that, then it's always going to reduce down to a degree to a power play. And you know what?
Yeah, if you don't acknowledge that the goal is to have a conversation on equal footing or an interaction on equal footing, then it's almost inevitably going to move into who wins and who loses.
That's right.
Okay.
And
yeah, I
this
agree to that.
means that someone is going to be damaged, possibly both. And if you take a look at that around us, and this is a incredibly egregious generalization. Okay. Moving into pop psychology here.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, that if you take a look at the generations and where you have an insecure parent generation that doesn't know how to say and to be present enough for their kids to be able to say, you know what, you can have opinions, but you cannot talk to me that way because I will not talk to you that way. And that do not have the emotional presence for the kid to get it.
Okay.
And they had to be raised that way because you might know, some of your parents or situation. And if you did that, you could probably say, oh, if I did that to whoever in the parent, they probably wouldn't give a damn about what your topic was. What they would give a damn about is how are you talking to me that way and how am I talking to you?
That was like, I guess that was part of the discomfort and shock of it all was like, if I had initiated something half that bad, like, I would have been hit. Like, there was, whatever it was, there would have been significant negative consequences.
There would not be happy campers, I
No.
would assume. And that is exactly right.
So, to bring it back to these college students who are disrespecting somebody almost purely because they're an authority figure. It's like and the fact that he's a white male probably doesn't help any, but they don't know, it doesn't seem to me at all from the video I've watched that they have any informed perspective at all, that they're attacking him because of what he looks like and what position he holds.
Okay, so I want to do a contrast before I jump on your side a little bit. Okay, so you need to also take a look at the conservative side when they attack liberals, when you do that. And
the old term labels are less useful, it feels like. Could you be a little more specific about who you're talking about?
When I have seen people do the Arizona congresswoman who was shot.
Gabby Giffords.
Right. When I see a conservative gun rights person, go at her. And if you stop,
allude that it was,
just stop, and just don't even necessarily listen to the words.
Okay.
But get a feel for how that person is talking.
Okay.
Now, if you take that feel, and so the human, personal, my thing, now you go into the situation that you gave of these young people talking to the president, and stop and just get a feel for it.
Very similar.
Actually, no.
No?
Well, some things are similar.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, the guy...
Justified anger comes to mind as a similarity.
Okay, so that's
Or
possible.
at least from their perspective.
This is the difference for me.
They're both wrong, but...
This, to me, is different.
Okay.
And this is the similarity. Okay, for me, both of the people doing the yelling are partying. They're having a good time. Now, the trouble with the conservative or the gun rights is they feel dangerous to me. Whereas these young people, rude, party, they don't feel dangerous to me.
See, again, this is a good point to highlight that difference again, because as a humanist, feeling, which one, yeah, way worse. But in my mind, it's kind of like I'm way more afraid of the communist than the fascist. The fascist I can hear coming a mile away.
Which one is the fascist?
The right wing.
Okay.
You hear them coming a mile away. They're shouting populist things. They're waving guns around. They're shooting them. They're being wildly bigoted. They're
So
obvious.
you dislike the insidiousness of the.
Yes.
Yeah.
The communists are trying to redefine terms, change things within academia, backdoor it. And the problem with that is you don't even know you're under attack until they're halfway done. Where you can see Trump coming literally a mile away.
My reaction isn't the same way. I'm more scared of the other ones because it seems more.
And then the immediate, if you're in the room with both of them, the fascist is a lot scarier.
Right. And so, okay, that's how I relate to it. Because again, but I wouldn't necessarily argue with your point.
Okay.
That you have, that some people will take a look at the insidious as the greater threat. Truth is, I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Again,
it's not the way I do it, but
before that, Orwell in like 1984 is literally the most terrifying thing I've ever read. And anything that moves even a step in that direction just waves a huge red flag for me.
And as I said, it wasn't 1984 of Orwell's; it was Animal Farm.
Yeah,
where you're in the barn with them. That's what scares me.
Yeah, they're both scary.
Right, but that to me, because of the humanity component. Not the clinical component of 84, but the humanity, the betrayal, and the greed that is right present, which I believe is more real on this. I don't necessarily think these talkers, I think they'll co-opt out sooner or later. I think most of them are pretty innocuous.
The good news is, I think this is a self-limiting ideology. I think that when these people actually get out in the real world, and they ask their boss where the safe space is because someone just microaggressed against them and they've been triggered, that will fly like once, that they'll fire you and they'll find someone else who doesn't bitch and moan about everything and just does their job. And it hasn't infiltrated STEM because, again, I can't remember if this was on the podcast or before, but we talked about the moral relativism and postmodernism, all this. Like, it's really hard for that to infiltrate STEM fields because at the end of the day, there's a right answer. The bridge stays up or it falls down. That particle has a spin or it doesn't. The 2 + 2 is 4 or it's not. You can't. There's not the wiggle room necessary to generate space for these ideologies to take root.
I don't disagree with what you're the kind of what you're saying, but there is something about what you're saying that. Anytime you celebrate rigidity, I have some problems with it.
See, I don't see it as rigidity. I see it as fact or truth or reality.
However, rigidity in this case, and granted that I'm bringing this to the table, so you don't necessarily mean this, but I think you inadvertently mean it, and I could be wrong, is that with that is testing for the STEM stuff. And some of that testing, which is incredibly bad, which is incredibly problematic for all kinds of levels of it. So somebody throws in the testing as well as the STEM stuff, education.
So what type of testing are we talking about?
We're talking about standardized testing to a certain types of test where they're not actually just that. And I think that type of standardized testing, some can be good. A lot of it is crap.
Okay, what's an example of? I'm just trying to.
Okay, so when in fact, we were discussing the fish versus the learning how to fish.
Give a man the fish he's fed for today. Teach him to fish, and he's fed for a lifetime.
So I'm making a giant jump here, but I had an educator, a UW educator, mention this in a talk that I attended recently.
It's the University of Washington for anybody not from around here.
Okay, is that indicated what happened to critical thinking in teaching, but for the students, that you're teaching critical thinking, which I believe is foundationally important in STEM stuff.
I think it's foundationally important to being a good human.
Great, all this kind of stuff. So they gave an example of critical thinking, which is read this whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then said something like, and how was your day?
Mm.
And it was like, they're going, what the hell? How was your day?
So it was a complete non sequitur.
Not only was a non sequitur, it showed no ability to do analysis or any form of critical thinking for the content that was
What does
being
the color pink taste like? It's like, what?
you're sitting there, and yet, so the test
Mm-hmm.
was like, what is today? What day is today? That they've standardized it
Mm-hmm.
to a point where it's serving the tester and the administrator. It is not serving the student in developing critical thinking skills.
Okay.
So those are, when I say rigidity, I have seen all too often that
So this would be like the downside of the Common Core, where you have resource
Yes.
poor,
Yes,
where they
Yes,
can only
good.
teach one thing, so they just teach the test.
that's a great
Completely
way of
absent context or real life exam or anything else.
So it's easy to jump on something saying we got to go this way, but you don't get the whole picture saying, wait a second, we've actually lost here.
Okay.
Because even though the original slogan was a good one, not unlike the social justice as you term it, but all the other stuff justified, wait a second, all kinds of bad things.
Well, the very common thing I see from, again, like as we started, as you said, sides is way too simplistic, but from
Right.
that side is statements like, wouldn't it be better if? It's like, well, yeah, everything would be better if gays were completely treated equally, if everybody could just do what it, yeah, that I completely agree. It's at the point where it's like, okay, now we need to do whatever's necessary to make that true tomorrow. That's where I run into problems.
So you've mentioned this any number of times. I wonder, one, if that's a conclusion on your part as to how you see behaviors, you see things, and so you put that within the anything goes category. As are they themselves saying we have to do whatever's necessary to get there?
I guess this is at the most fundamental level. Anytime you try and force someone to do, or force society or groups to do something, a significant percentage is going to fight back on principle of not wanting to be,
So
you're
that
not the
would
boss of me.
So
type.
that would be the much better discussion.
Okay.
So let's take an example of one.
Sure.
One that I did spend actually a little time looking into.
Okay.
Let's talk about Oregon and the taking over of the federal building by
the right wing nutty people.
right.
Yeah.
That we're sitting there, this is our land, it's not government land, and etc. on this.
Yeah, well, the media blacked out that entire 100-mile area like week 2 and dropped in agents and just made it not a problem anymore.
So this is a social justice issue. It is a
Okay.
social justice issue. It is not who normally plays in social justice land, but that's essentially a social justice issue.
Grazing rights
Yeah.
and fees or
Yeah.
social? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. That the government has
Okay.
overreached itself. That people should have freedom and access. Of course it is. So first of all,
But most SJWs fight for the exact opposite. They want the government to be more rigid about what they tell people can and can't do.
so it would be an interesting example for you to look at it,
Okay.
to exercise that this is actually a social justice. It just doesn't happen to look like.
No, I'm open
the
to it.
ones you're
I'm
used to.
curious as how you're
On
going to
this.
bring this home here.
It's just a matter of they feel that their rights, their freedoms have been abridged,
Okay.
and that they've had to force to take effort. If you talk to them, they would tell you, I think, that it was a social justice issue.
I think they
In
would-
fact, many of them did say that.
I don't remember hearing that at all. I heard libertarian a lot.
Okay,
And
libertarian and social justice doesn't have, enormous differences in some ways.
well, where they fall on the political spectrum at the moment, they're almost diametrically opposed. Stalinists and Ayn Randians are about as far apart, and that's the super extremes of both. But that's what they're about as far apart as you can
I
get.
believe that it would be of some value to see them as social justice types.
In means, if not motive.
Actually, in motive.
Okay.
And means as well. So that they were sitting there trying to have freedoms and rights and being treated how they see as fair.
Mm-hmm. See, and this is a fundamental of the social justice warriors, and it's something that we, in our pre-discussion, I'm hoping that we could expand upon a little bit, is what I see are these like offense collectors. And like anytime anyone says,
Perfect. That's what
I'm
these people
offended
did.
for someone else.
That's exactly what these people
okay,
did.
so you're talking about from the perspective of the people who drove from Texas to there to support these guys, not the original guys themselves necessarily.
Well, actually, the original guys too. But what happened is,
Well, they just seem like complete and total assholes.
well, you think, but the locals, the ones who actually
Legitimate racists. There was video of that guy.
right, of course, you know, there's
Yeah.
and everybody went, "Oh my God, this guy was." But the locals
Weren't
responded.
a couple of the presidential Republicans cozying up to him and then
Absolutely
ran for the hills?
Right. But how was the locals, the ones who were actually on the ground and impacted? What was their response to these outsiders coming in and taking over?
Well, they
this
were kind of in
building?
the middle of nowhere, weren't they?
Pretty much. But what the point was,
I mean, they weren't happy they were there.
they were completely unhappy.
Hmm.
And they were betwixt and between saying, you know, we're not all that crazy about the government, but we've been working with these people for a long time to getting win-win situations going on. And then these jokers come in who, you know, and co-opted our issues, which is not sounding all that dissimilar
Okay.
to much of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm calling it a social justice issue, because I actually
Okay.
see it as what? In the framework and the way you're saying it. Yeah, it's just an interesting, I know.
Significant paradigm shift. All right,
Perfect.
I'm not trying to wrap my head around that.
So the point being is that that's the fun stuff, was when you see him going, oh, okay, because then you can pull out, well, here's the crap piece of all that. If in fact, and I'm taking a giant leap here and I'm probably going to regret it, but if you take a look at this, the son of
You're
the
still
wealthy,
relatively anonymous here.
good, the son of the wealthy person
Yeah.
who gets in front of the car, isn't part of your issue that they're co-opting the issue? That they don't actually, they themselves, that they're...
No, but it probably should have been. But actually, that wasn't even...
But the point being is that all of a sudden, they're not experiencing, as far as this reporting is concerned, all this stuff they're doing.
Well, if they were a truly oppressed person, jumping in front of a car could be a life-changing, like, oh, I have a broken leg, I can't work, I'm ruined for life. Where, you know, versus millionaire daddy flies in a helicopter to take you to safe. All right, I'm being hyperbolic. But that was not, even if he had been run over and broke a leg, that would not have fundamentally changed his life a year down the road.
Well, what I'm indicating is
make
that
him an even better victim.
Right. That you have people who have their own agendas.
Yeah.
That don't necessarily really give a damn, apparently, from the issues going on. And are co-opting these issues that have some real emotional appeal and maybe even substance to them, and taking it off. But their care for humanity is quite questionable.
Okay, and these are the majority of what I would call social justice warriors, I think, fall within the realm of useful idiots. That they're well-meaning people who believe in what they're attempting and just haven't necessarily thought it through. And are being manipulated, much like the Tea Party was on the other side. Tea Party was like, we don't want to pay taxes, and somehow got manipulated and funded by billionaires to keep the billionaires from paying taxes.
Yeah, I would say that while your categorization is not the same as my categorization of these, because I think there's a whole lot of personal entertainment that goes on for people. For the Tea
that's
Party,
something you brought, and I agree with. That's definitely not part of my thinking about it, but I think I should try and incorporate that a little more as for the motivations for why, not only why they're doing it, but why they get so gung ho or vicious or so much energy behind it.
Yeah, that to me, see, and you can see how that spans the spectrum on both sides of it, and that kind of stuff. That's informed by the humanity level. So I don't get lost in the conceptual philosophical as going, you're getting off on this. You're marching because you like to march. You're doing this 60s replication routine on this. Yeah, keep away from me.
So yeah,
you're doing this because you're fighting the Civil War and you've got this fantasy of playing blue and gray shit going on, and that's working for you. Keep away from me. This
Okay.
is entertainment, fantasy entertainment of that.
So yeah, that's valuable to incorporate into my thinking on this, I think. And I guess from my point of view, there's definitely value from your perspective. From my perspective, I can see the value of yours because it informs. You can stare at actuarial tables and statistics all day, and yes, they give a much more accurate picture of what's going on than talking to somebody on the street.
No question.
But at the end of the day, they're like little sharp boxes, and they're nowhere near the resolution necessary to actually represent reality.
Good.
So
Very
when
good.
you get down to the resolution where they fail, you have to inform it with your perspective. But at the same time, I would flip it around and say that the danger of focusing on anecdotal or personal experience, absent the context of how that. See, to me, it's like, okay, if I'm looking at what's in front of me and it doesn't fit those statistics and actuarial tables, that to me, all right, how is it different? That can give me a greater understanding of that, because it's
So
how does my skewed perception of this, is my perception skewed? Is this a non-representative sample? What's going on?
anytime what's going on. Okay, so again, dangerous territory in the sense of it, but using it just the way you're saying it.
Mm-hmm.
If you
It
have
being what now?
facts,
Okay.
your actuarial tables,
The
actuarial,
actuarial.
I could be better at that. Tables.
Mm-hmm.
If in fact you're saying, and you have evidence that 90%,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an extreme case, of the people are this way, and my observation is incompatible with the 90%,
Mm-hmm.
then I have a problem. I'm
Mm-hmm.
agreeing with you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if 90%, your facts may be skewed, may be interpreted, may be whatever, so you cannot do them in isolation.
Okay.
However, it is still a data point. So I don't disagree, is that if there's significant evidence on either side, for example, I just said that entertainment value is a major factor.
Yeah.
You said, oh, okay, I got to take that. You sit there, 90% say this.
Mm-hmm.
Then I also have to sit there and go, okay, we had an example of this, not in our pre-discussion, our post one. You framed certain Black Lives Matter and the other one, the economic one, taking over Wall Street one.
Oh, Occupy.
As having, and again, I'm distilling
What
down
was it?
of
Black Lives Matter. The Atheism Plus, you mean?
No,
Or-
that was the feminist piece. That you said there were feminist
Oh,
elements
yeah.
starting to play a larger role.
I guess that's why I like SJW, because it's not like, not everyone in Black Lives Matter would be an SJW. Not every feminist is an SJW. So there's.
But you introduced, I wasn't aware of any of that
Okay. Yeah.
as a factor, and you kept identifying more data.
Mm.
And I went, oh, I hadn't saw
Okay.
what all
Oh,
that.
at Mizzou and whatnot. Okay.
I might have to take that into account.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change the fact that entertainment is a big deal. It does mean, however, that I may not be having as accurate of a picture of it from my perspective.
Okay.
That always has to be on whosever side you're on, because this stuff is really complicated.
I do. Well, like one thing I remember, the actuarial tables or statistic, whatever, are useful in some ways because it can reveal if somebody's numbers don't make sense at a fundamental level.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'll just preface, I've been called a rape apologist for even broaching the subject before. So just to preface it, but that
So you realize this is a riskier territory
yeah,
for me.
yeah, but that the 1 in 5 women are raped in college, or I guess they use the term sexually assaulted, versus the number that are actually reported under like FBI statistics is what most people use when they're talking about what crimes happened or not. And I can fully concede that they may be wildly underreported. Then they also say that 56% of rapes or sexual assaults are never reported. And it's like, okay, so you're saying
Well, let's stop on that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say that number, let's use that number.
Yeah.
56 are not reported.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Could that exist?
In theory, yeah.
Why?
All kinds of the
Like
inherent in the two primary reasons I would say is the inherent shame around
So stop.
reporting the act,
So
and
that's
then
number
the
one.
institutional pressure to not want to have to deal with it
Okay.
within the college or
So this
university
is
spheres.
a critical issue
Mm-hmm.
in our being able to communicate on this.
Okay.
Is that the number could be real, could even be greater,
Mm-hmm.
could be less. Two very possible
Mm-hmm.
reasons for the underreporting are the two that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There may be additional ones that
Sure.
we don't even know that may even be more powerful.
Potentially.
Okay. So, anytime, now this is my frame of reference.
Well, one more. Just I
Yeah.
want so they say 1 in 5,
Mm-hmm.
and they say 56% are not reported.
Mhm.
So it would actually be. I don't know exactly what they're implying there, but my plain reading of it says that it's actually probably closer to 2 in 5,
Mhm.
so 40%. And then you look at the crime statistics of things that are actually reported to the authorities as a crime
Mm-hmm.
are actually lower for college campuses and their surrounding areas than the population as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't 1% or something in that neighborhood. So we're talking about order of magnitude differences in numbers.
Okay.
And that I don't know. It's like if I was going to put out, and this came from one infographic, 1 in 5 or this and 56%. So even in and of itself is a little confusing because I'm not sure what they're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was going to make an infographic, I would at least make sure that if I Googled, oh, what is the crime rate or the rape rate, or whatever, that the numbers I put on the infographic
Okay.
would somehow
So this is
interact with that or explain
understand.
that.
So this is the critical piece
Mm-hmm.
in our communication.
Okay.
And we talked a little in our pre-conversation about
Mhm.
values and purposes and how critical role they play
Yeah.
in how we look at things and how we relate to things and how we understand things.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This is one of the most difficult areas for so many on this. And it does seem to be slightly difficult for men.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about, and remember, I deal with it at a human level.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if you were not dealing with tables?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it was a friend of yours
Yeah.
who was one of the unreported,
Mm-hmm.
and this shattered their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And you were impacted and you heard that it shattered their lives.
Yeah.
How would that change, not necessarily any of the tables,
Mm-hmm.
how would it change the way you would relate to those tables? How would it change
No,
how
I get
you,
what you're saying.
how you would talk about those tables? And it is my opinion
Yeah.
that incredibly this is a core violation, a core problem. Without respect and compassion
Mm-hmm.
and understanding. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying anything about lying,
Yeah.
changing, or shifting anything, but without having an actual compassion
Mm-hmm.
and wisdom and understanding, then the likely, first of all, that is additional damage done,
Mm-hmm.
potentially. Also, it needs to broaden how the conversation is done. And in many ways, this is one of the difficulties with social justice stuff in general,
Okay.
because what you have is that is not an excuse for getting in front of a car
Mm-hmm.
if you're a millionaire's son
Yeah.
and getting nudged to draw to this.
Mm-hmm.
It is, but it's an incredibly complex set of things that can only be, for me,
Mm-hmm.
addressed very carefully and respectfully,
Mm-hmm.
however, also courageously. Courage is not blindness. If
Okay.
I'm going to make a statement about something and that I'm moving anywhere near generalization,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that A, there's going to be an individual
Yeah.
who's very likely suffered some enormous pain,
Mm-hmm.
unfairness, etc., that my words
Yeah.
may some
Okay.
would even legitimately say either minimize or deny. I have to do that with ownership, because if that person walks up to me,
Mm-hmm.
I have go way back to the parents
Mm-hmm.
and that argument. I need to be able to go, wow, that pain was something I created,
Okay.
or at least enhanced.
Yeah. And that note, okay, so to generally answer the question, I guess it would definitely inform the way I interacted with that person and other people to a degree that I can't do now just because I don't have that experience or that direct connection. Obvious. I would hope though that,
And you know that I have.
yeah, but at the same time, when I'm looking at claims and facts, and
No, no, no.
or
Your
assumed
numbers
okay,
that the FBI and all that
sure.
kind of stuff.
That, and do I think that that is underreported one way or another? Yes. Is it 2, 3, 4 times underreported? Maybe. But we're talking about orders of magnitude difference here.
Yeah.
So, and then when you dig into the methodology of that 1 in 5 number, like
Or underreported.
yeah.
Or any number of things.
But so, like if you ask the same people, I mean, there's self-selection and other stuff going on, but if you just ask them, even the people that they had to buy a sample, no, if you ask them, were you raped or were you sexually assaulted? Far less than 1 in 5 would say yes, because to get to that 1 in 5 number, they included any interactions that had alcohol involved. Yeah. So if the point they're trying to make would be, what percentage of women in college experienced some type of sexual interaction that was uncomfortable or they regretted after the fact? 1 in 5? Yeah. Okay. I believe that number. But to equate that with sexual assault with a crime and to label anyone who was on the other side of those interactions a criminal is not valid. Especially when it's done through social media and attacks.
Yeah, that's another
and there's
matter.
never. And if I did have that friend who was one unreported, I would encourage them
So let
and
me
support
ask
them
you-
in every way I could
so let me-
to report it and to
let me-
pursue,
So let me ask you a question.
through channels.
So there was this, and this is, again,
Mm-hmm.
very media based, so that means it's really at this level.
Yeah.
So you got this guy who's a star quarterback at Florida State,
Okay.
who stands up in the middle of a cafeteria
Mm-hmm.
and uses incredibly sexist, derogatory statements for no particular reason that anyone can tell,
Yeah.
who has in fact been accused of rape.
Okay.
And that there were, and somehow you take a look at all the legal procedures around it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funky as hell.
Sure. But that has a simple explanation. It doesn't mean that the administrators like rape or whatever the hell he said. It means they like money more.
Perfect.
That's it.
Perfect. Stay with that.
Okay.
And, so that you have a prioritization
Mm-hmm.
that has nothing to do with humanity, has
Yeah.
to deal with
Bottom lines.
not only bottom lines, well, maybe ultimately, always bottom
Well,
line.
prestige. Yeah, everything else
all
that
that kind of
probably ends
stuff.
up at the bottom line sooner or
Okay.
later.
So, is that example
Mm-hmm.
unique? Was that the only time that ever happened?
No.
Of course not. Has it happened a great deal? Deal.
What's your threshold for a great deal?
Let's say that startling often.
What would that be?
Well, that it would be
Can you
more
give me a
than
percentage within 10? I mean,
2.
2% of the time is startlingly. That's not startlingly often to my reckoning.
Would it be?
That would be an expected level.
Great.
And well, if we're talking about like Division 1, places that make
I
enough
am-
money off
yes,
sports that
that
it
is
matters.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Within Division 1, I would say 2% might be conservative. 5% seems a reasonable number.
Okay. So, would you call that a style of doing business? That
Yeah.
engages administration, the legal authorities,
Sure.
the political authorities.
And I would put it under the same general header as the way Enron conducted business.
Yes,
It's
Yes.
money at the end of the day. I don't
Yes.
care how I get it.
yes.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
I think it's far more reprehensible to be coming out of a supposed institution of learning than a corporation, which makes it even worse.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I think it's of the same ilk.
And that all is what we're talking about. Is
But
that
so
the
if you're
context?
arguing against that, I think that was one of the
Against
most,
that, what do you mean?
or that if you're attacking the person who's conducting themselves that way, conducting business that way, is it most effective to try and knee-jerk label them a racist or a misogynist or whatever else, or is it better to figure out what levers you can exert against their money? You know, and you're flinging, especially when
Believe
you
it or
knee-jerk
not,
fling those labels with.
believe it or not, I have some degree of sympathy for this position that you
Okay.
have. That what you have in social justice
Mm-hmm.
for people, and again, I can't speak personally on this. I do it from books that I've read,
Mm-hmm.
films, people who've talked to me, but I can't say it from my
Okay.
personal point of view. From those social movements that actually were effective,
Mm-hmm.
they got to that level.
Yeah.
They started saying, okay, we can do all this only in service of how do we sit there and get to that bottom line.
Yeah. Well, if you want to persuade someone, recognizing their motivations, their priorities is probably a good first step.
It seems to be.
Shouting your rhetoric and your ideology at them, they don't care.
And that is probably going back to the original,
Mm-hmm.
why these guys are partying in social justice. Because
They don't care about effectiveness. They care about
partying.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. That your humanistic individual level is informed at a new level, and in some ways makes it even sicker. Because now it casts aspersion. Because before to me, they were well-meaning idiots. Now you've called into question their motivation at a level.
I have, actually, because I've never seen them as well-meaning idiots.
Okay.
I've seen that as self-serving. Very, very often I see social justice people, the do-gooder sort of thing. It's an incredibly cheap way out. One of the things moving into racism, which is a more entertaining direction,
All right, that's an interesting statement.
is that white privilege, one of your favorite terms.
Actually, I was going to bring that up. I didn't put it on the list, but we had generated a list of terms before we started here. But that the guys in Oregon or down in Arizona or wherever they were, where they were like pointing high-powered rifles at federal agents and stuff. Okay, most of the times when people scream white privilege, I don't necessarily agree. That right there, I would happily concede. But is it more conservative privilege? I mean, they're kind of in that sense.
Well,
like if black people had pointed high-powered rifles at federal officials, almost certainly
they'd be dead.
So I can see that there's something going on there, but I do wonder if it was white liberals, would they have survived that?
Probably not to.
So is it really more conservative privilege than white privilege in this case?
It depends on how much money they have, I suppose. The truth is, I don't know.
Okay.
But let's go into the flip side and do on what you're calling social justice groups. And let's take a look at white privilege there. This happens to be in the last 6 months thing that's particularly impacted me unpleasantly.
Okay.
That I was involved in some activities, and I'd had a number of, quote, your social justice warriors or your liberals or whatever.
Oh,
bemoaning.
Let's call them progressives.
Whatever. Well, I didn't actually use progressive because I actually have a slightly better feel for progressives than I do for liberals.
Okay, I consider liberals to be distinct from.
So and I have some. So we will say people who vocally embrace these concepts.
Left wingers, will that work?
Let's just move on.
Okay.
I think we've got that. And that I happen to be in a situation where they were espousing acknowledgement of their white privilege.
Okay.
And they
what form did that take?
Just that. As I know I have white privilege, and I know that this is something that I have to get by, and etc. So they've embraced the point.
But they really I hear that all the time, and it feels like it's some type of it's a virtue signal that they half the time more than half the time they don't even understand what they're saying, other than it will make the other side stop yelling at them.
Well, yes and no.
Or is a step in that direction anyway?
Well, I think you're simplifying here and that.
Well, yeah.
But they did this one particular individual, and how guilty that person felt. And I just went, oh, I really don't want to have to hit you.
Okay.
Because it frankly turned my stomach.
How?
Just that. There was the energy, there was the experience of it. And
Of
so,
contrition, of
I don't
guilt,
know,
of
guilt.
okay.
Somehow this espousing of guilt was something that was supposed to be good, when in fact I found it repulsive.
Okay, I generally agree.
And I went through, as I do when I
Mm-hmm.
find something, and went, why is this bothering me as much as it did?
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to a number of people of color who I respect and said, this just drove me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Am I crazy or am I whatever? And they go, oh no. Well, you're just seeing as another version of white privilege.
How
And
so?
well, it's a little more difficult
Okay.
for white people on this one. But the fact that you have the luxury of being guilty about it. Truth is, who gives a damn if you're guilty or not?
Now, would it be more correct to state it that you have the privilege of not feeling guilty about it?
I have
And
no
that's
idea.
how the majority of white people, from their perspective,
I
are?
think it's
or-
both ways. On this point,
I guess it depends on why you're guilty.
the guilty that who knows. The fact is that you're guilty
Mm-hmm.
means nothing. It means that you're not involved in it, that you just get to feel guilty about it. It's another form of privilege. I'm not saying I fully understand it,
Okay.
but I believe it.
It's like balling all of it up into one spot and disavowing it and then considering yourself separate from
I
it.
don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but it was sitting there going, first of all, when I heard it, I just went, wow, I really want to hurt you. Because that just is really annoying.
I don't know if I've ever heard you say that.
Oh my goodness, it stuck with me. And it was like,
You seem very anti-violence in virtually all circumstances.
I really pretty much am, and I wouldn't, of course, but it's...
No, but even to hear you use that terminology is odd.
I'm just sitting there going, oh my God. And I did. I went and talked to people I really respect, and then I did some more reading on it and found enough people to saying, just keep it to yourself. Just, there's almost a rush. It's another form of, oh, I'm reveling in my guilt. So I guess it's like taking this thing that was really, really quite horrible and turning it into another version, kind of a perversion version of white privilege.
See, I can loop this back to where we were talking free speech earlier about I guess the reason I am comfortable towing right up to that line is because
I would never have said that in that group that I said that.
And similar to this is that because in my mind, the last filter before something truly matters is the hearer, is their brain, their decision to act upon what they heard or not. And that nothing is truly, no one's transgressed to a level that is worthy of punishment or correction or regular whatever until action is taken. As long as it's all potentiality, ideas floating around, that in that state, every individual has a responsibility to filter that out, and they are ultimately responsible for their actions. Like I said, if it's that somebody up in front, that person in power gives a direct command to do something, but if they just insinuate or whatever, then it lets them off the hook only because there's another individual in that chain of events that should have been the final point that could have corrected that, and they're the ones that chose to actually act upon it. And I just can't support the legislation, the regulation, or whatever of your internal headspace in really any way. And I don't think it matters in any way until it transgresses into true action. This is why I don't believe in hate crimes being a valid formulation of jurisprudence.
Okay, so as in most of our discussions on these things, you make some valid points. There's no question. You tend to simplify in one or two critical areas. So granted that I'm splitting,
and that's why that's why we're having this conversation. Is you have a ability to point those out in a way that is useful. I find
your point of command is a continuum.
Yeah,
it's not a one or not. So in legal,
and I completely acknowledge that I'm writing that pretty close to one end of a continuum.
Right.
Yeah.
The ability to incite is the critical factor here. So on the flip side, the attractive part of what you're saying is that have we got an agreement here of
Mhm.
responsible adults to say, guys, we have to buy an agreement, and this is what has been always problematic and what's so scary now, that we have an agreement of social order. We have
The
agreement,
social contract.
yes,
Yeah.
and that which is so getting more and more compromised
Mm-hmm.
on these things. We have to recognize that the social contract is compromised. Now, does that mean we throw away personal responsibility? No.
So what in just to run with this, in what way in say the West or the United States specifically, what is the most egregious current violation of that social contract?
I don't know.
See, to me, it'd be income inequality. Would be the obvious, or maybe not obvious, but the immediate, the and the corollary of the corruption of the political process through those piles of money.
Well, I would be hard pressed to disagree of the enormous impact of that.
Yeah, that racism and sexism and all these other isms and problems are on the board, but that the one lever you could move, that the rising tide lifts all boats,
Yeah.
is the economics. Then a lot of these other things that are pissing people off don't piss you off so much if you can buy a new car and take a vacation.
Yeah, I this is the weakness of my particular view of things, that violence takes priority for me. Now, the cause of the violence, which is what you were talking about, is
it all comes back to the perspectives, because it is in the immediate moment, violence in front of you is way worse. But if you take the historical view, you kind of have to acknowledge that violence is both inevitable and necessary at some scale and sometimes. At least as far as it's that in potential, maybe we could get rid of it someday.
Yeah.
But we haven't. No one has ever been able to in the long term so far.
Well, the cycle of the income equality that we're moving to, that eventually moves to revolution and system collapse, seems pretty much on, heading that way. That the disequality of this and the haves versus the have-nots, and
I think again,
it's not been where I have placed my energy and attention.
Well, I guess, and again, maybe you're right. Accused isn't the right word. You offer that maybe I'm seeing stuff through political lenses primarily, and I wouldn't say overall, but definitely within the context of the recent election, I was.
Yeah.
And that those, again, it's the fundamental of why did Trump win? Was it a racist thing or was it an economic thing?
And
I mean,
why
that's
would they be
wildly simplifying.
And why would they be different things? Why isn't that the same thing?
Because you have the entire upper Midwest, who is the most racked by economic issues, who had faithfully voted for the black president twice.
But there's a book.
Voted for Trump.
There's a book, The Hillbilly Elegy.
Okay.
That is a fascinating read.
Okay.
And what it essentially is ask that question. And it uses Louisiana, I believe, maybe Mississippi, but and says, okay, here is this impoverished, routinely politically raped for generations, and yet they are so staunch Republicans. You sit there and you go, these are the people raping you constantly, and yet you have been successfully, apparently, alienated to such a degree that if somebody just says, hey, God, kill, you'll vote Republican.
Yeah.
On this.
Which kind of points to something on the Democratic platform being fundamentally anathema to their worldview.
Perhaps. Or that the iron grip of the slavery of who they are is so intense. You see, I think it's far more serious.
There is OkCupid turned out to be this treasure trove of sociological data.
I don't know.
It's like a dating site there or whatever, and they take profiles and they've provided anonymized data of all their stuff. And there's all kinds of interesting stuff, but one of the fundamentals was at a rate of 2 to 1, conservatives prefer simple to complicated, and liberals are the exact opposite.
Makes sense.
So I think that what you're talking about, and that belonging to that team and following and becoming rigid within that framework, is even more likely on that side, because all you're really listening for is that one rah rah go team.
Right.
They don't want a second sentence or anything else. Where
That's right.
the liberal is like, okay, tell me more.
Right.
And that has its own issues, as evidenced by everything we've been talking about.
So
But yeah,
if you take a look at,
I'm not sure where I was going with that.
That's all right. I'll see if I decide whether to take us down a different route.
Okay.
So it is possibly, really, probably going to regret this as well.
It's like the third or fourth time you said that.
Well, it's such new thinking on my part that I'm really struggling a little bit, but it's so much fun in a really sicko way. Is that, would it be fair to say that the conservative side, since you allowed that term,
Okay.
has more of a affinity for, let's say, standardized religion?
Standardize in the like centralized authority type model? Yes. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So this has not been an area that I have had as much understanding of as can exist by leaps and bounds, because I have no interest. And the so apparent contradiction in all that I value and they espouse that they value, and yet their actions are so completely in oppose to what they seem to espouse.
Okay. And
And an
what do you
example
mean?
would be specifically the movie Stoplight.
I don't remember that one.
This is the documentation of the Boston Archdiocese and all the child abuse, the predatory, which I have some knowledge of and some experience of generically, and how the church somehow has encompassed this. Now, in my understanding of the church or its purpose, if in fact you found any remote pattern of child predatory behavior, that would be a signal to say, we have to completely disband.
Well, it did depose the sitting pope
It's
indirectly.
Not sufficient.
No.
The entire thing has to sit there and go, you know what? We've really screwed this puppy up.
Yeah. If they were all like, went back to St. Francis Assisi, sold all the gold, made reparations, mea culpa, then crawled around on their hands and knees for a decade. Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe, exactly, on this. So the fact that they somehow make some argument that I can't even understand, that there's some greater good that they continue on, because no, this is all about money, power,
It's just
position, privilege.
The Catholic Church is just the last vestiges of the Roman Empire.
Whatever.
Pretty plain and simple from my perspective.
So I don't understand this. I don't understand it at a human level. I just don't understand it. Something came up. Something came up recently that helped me understand it.
Okay.
And I'm so fascinated that again, without going into any details, I got a message. What one could think of was a representative of the church.
Okay.
Directing me to do something.
Okay.
That they were not competent to direct me on. And it was a directive. And I'm sitting there kind of going, oh my goodness, this is abusive. This tone and the feel of it was abusive.
To you personally?
To me personally.
Okay.
It was sent to many people. And I'm sure I'm the only one who had this particular response to it.
Okay.
Because I have a bit of an outsider point of view of these things.
Okay.
And I'm sitting there going...
I'm just wondering how much this is making sense to anybody that doesn't know specific context.
Well, there is that. But the point being is that the message by someone who was not overly competent was relying on their positional authority to provide a directive.
Okay.
And the problem with the positional authority, it had some relationship to the church.
Okay.
There was a spiritual, far, far back into it, a religious organization
Mm-hmm.
message in that. And I just went, oh my God. They see themselves as this inherent
To
representation.
contextualize it to something more generic or more familiar to the generic listener, it'd be like with the contraceptive coverage under Obamacare, all the religious. So anyone that had any claim to being a religious thing, even if they're a corporation, if they're like owned or an LLC that's owned by a religious person, they're saying, well, I shouldn't have to pay for
Yeah, in part, yes.
contraceptive. And the only real validity they had was purely religious in nature. And when it's completely it's like, well, if you're gonna, my thought on all that is, if you're gonna play in the secular society as a normal player and go by the same rules and stuff, then you got to play by whatever those rules are,
And that
you can't pick and choose,
that you
which
have,
only religion gets to do almost.
that
Well,
you're
and super rich people.
using a religious spiritual frame of reference
Mm-hmm.
to do a power play.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, wow, somehow that's okay for lots and lots and lots of people. And I remember hearing this said many, many times that the priest,
Was this a new realization?
for me, yes,
Oh, okay.
because I felt it.
As an outspoken atheist, this is a very common. This is like my daily condition.
Well, but I haven't ever felt it
Okay.
before. For whatever reason, I felt it this time.
Hmm.
And that I've always been opposed to it, and I've always been. But this was like, it made more sense to me that when I've heard so many people say, well, we didn't question the priest because that's the closest thing to God we have.
So it informed you of other people's perspectives in a
Yes.
way that was enlightening.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool.
I know.
Or useful, at least.
It was like, oh my God, they're taking this, they have this, since they're inside the system,
Mm-hmm.
that, in quote, the priest does have some type of spiritual gravitas. So that puts everything they say in the follow the orders.
Very paternalistic in a way.
In
Or just
part,
authoritarian in general, I guess.
You know, it was just a matter of that there was this power element.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there going, wow, they're coming at me from that direction.
Well, and it explains how you can get this. It's like a force multiplier. You get this
Yes. Yes, yes.
extreme fervor from people following. I mean, bring it back to the Romans, like Caesar. The reason he was able to do half of what he did was that he was fundamentally respected, not just as a general, but as a father. That these soldiers were following his commands as if it was their own father had given it to them. It's like, build a bridge across there now. Oh, 2 days later, there's a freaking bridge out of nothing. And it's like, you know, and you see that fervor. I see it all the time from all different religions, and it's kind of terrifying from my perspective.
So if you see back to your statement that started this, is that you have people who are the conservatives, the hard right. They want one statement, yay team.
Yeah.
And
like a singular concept.
A singular concept that has this force of God, this force of whatever.
A singular tent pole to hang their existence and worldview around.
But it also is motivated and forced by this framework.
From my perspective, it's a desire to have the answer. And from a more liberal or specific, like a scientific point of view, it's very, and I completely acknowledge, it's really hard. You basically have to embrace what's real, what's true, what's solid fact is always as best as we know at the moment, and anything and everything can change at a moment's notice and redefine everything. That's terrifying.
So the point being,
but true,
is that essentially they want to have power. And this is about power.
I would say the leaders, I think the followers.
No. I mean the followers.
If you mean power as far as how they the power of defining their own existence in terms they.
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what I mean. Think about it.
I would choose a different comfort. Almost, it seems more relevant than power.
Always. The two are not separate.
Because they're actually, it seems like they're diminishing their power by ceding it to the authority that's feeding them the comfort food.
If you didn't understand that they're identifying with this source.
Yeah, I guess again, in my
You're
perspective,
looking at it as
as
an
an atheist,
individual,
that
as
their
an
tent pole
individual.
is phantasmal. It's not real.
And that's because you're not, but you have to relate to it from their point of
Yes, and
view.
if there's enough of them and they all pretend it's real, it
No,
may
no, no, no,
functionally it
no, no.
is.
I don't think it matters whether there's enough of them
Okay.
in the way they see it. I think ultimately it matters a great deal. But from within their sense,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this gives them power.
So the strength with which they believe defines it.
Yes.
So two people that believe it really strong can make it real from their perspective, at least.
Well, it can make it dangerous, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and that multiplies obviously with more people.
Yeah. So the point being is that how do you see?
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of how do you have a conversation when foundationally you're saying, this is my planet, this is my reality, and anything that pushes against that, I have to push back
Mm-hmm.
because it is power, comfort, control, all those sort of things, and it's good.
Yeah, I guess another way to formulate that difference between the conservative and liberal or whatever term best, would be the people who are like, this is the way it is. It's like the degree to which you could tolerate, yeah, but what if statements following it, almost like the liberal would be able to to still hold their
No,
current state
no,
and entertain
no,
another.
no, because why I agree with you that on philosophical,
Mm-hmm.
most of them, and I put in evangelicals in this category, is that they can use the terms, but they reserve the right not to believe them.
At least until they're dying, and then they'll believe them for sure.
No, no, I mean the evangelicals. They always believe what they are. They play the word game,
Mm-hmm.
the what if, but they know they're right.
Okay, where like, and again, I guess I'm overlapped with the liberal or the scientific would be, I'm right. I know I'm right unless you can bring more evidence that shows me I'm wrong.
Right, and that's a different framework.
Mm-hmm. And I think I've gotten caught up with this with like somebody trying to defend the moon landing or whatever, and the difference between absolute fact and fact so well supported that to not treat it as absolute, at least for the time being, is crazy.
And you see, what would be more fun and entertaining for
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
is the greater understanding of these alternative, what you would call alternative universe types. That this religious core point of view,
Uh-huh.
see, it's an entire different frame of reference. Even though you're using a very reasonable absolute versus widely supported,
Mm-hmm.
that's your words and your terminology that do not translate readily over to a fundamental and how I perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
And this might be a bit strange. I perceive it as a flow, as a river, they're in this river
Uh-huh.
and they're hearing everything from this particular emotional context.
Okay.
And so all that you're doing is talking over things that are touching the top of their surface.
I guess I wouldn't have as much trouble with it if they weren't like expressing all these things with each other across social media, using devices that hinge upon quantum mechanics to even work. It's kind of like the facts I believe, like, if I write down the instructions of how to build a computer
Yeah.
and send it to somebody in China, they can build a computer.
Right.
It's true. It works.
Right.
I mean, there's the great Darwin. Somebody posited what if
Yeah.
you're wrong?
Yeah.
And it was like, science, it works, bitches.
Right.
It's just like,
Yeah.
we're right because our worldview is built everything and anything that we use on a day-to-day technologically wise. I mean, and if of all these old views, because almost all these are very old worldviews, if they were so great, how can we chug along for over 1,000 years with Christianity and no one invented the light bulb, no one invented a printing press, no one invented anything of substance really, until somebody went beyond that and reframed
Right.
the rubric for what is truth,
Okay.
and
so
was able to leverage it to make the entire modern world.
And
Yeah. Sorry, there was a
for
bit
someone,
of diatribe there.
Yeah, well, and you're missing applying your own principles to that conversation.
How so?
Okay. You keep saying how you take a historical context.
Mm-hmm.
one reasonable historical context to Trump
Okay.
is that he is a pushback against Obama.
Yeah.
Whether yay or nay, it's a reasonable point.
I think that whatever energy within our society that was pushed back towards Obama voted for Trump. Yes.
Okay, so what if we took this in a 1,000-year framework?
Okay.
And let us say, and I'm granted this is speculation, but that
Forward or back or both?
hang on,
Okay.
so that you have 1,000 years of rigidity, let's say, in religious rigidity, that we are focused on follow the church. We're going to hang anybody who doesn't play in our game, and then eventually.
So we're talking about like follow Rome to the Renaissance.
Yes.
Okay.
And that all of a sudden we get some. Whoa! Wait a second. There's light bulbs. There's like electricity. There's like transistors, etc. And now, what we have and it's not linear.
Yeah.
Some pushback by not an insignificant amount of the population saying we got to push back against this.
Okay, to frame Trump as a pushback against that overall
No.
arc.
I'm not
Okay.
talking about Trump at
That's
all.
got way too much credit.
Right, I grant
Okay.
you that.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear about that.
But the religion component.
Okay. Yeah, that you see. Well, a great example, or I don't know, it seems like a great example, is the prevalence now of people believing stupid ass conspiracy theories. They're just nonsense. Like the number of people who believe the earth is flat again is like, because they just want to believe in some truth that they know, that, you know, they want to be that minority that knows the real truth and everyone else is wrong.
They want to have the religious framework that does it.
What's the relevatory?
Right.
Yeah.
So those are viewed in that, which means, wow, bigger forces than we can truly understand. The powers that be are bigger than.
I don't know. I guess what I'm describing, I wouldn't necessarily put as some overarching power, as more some innate element of human. Like, I think
those two
to
are
believe
not,
in something.
Those two are not.
There's actually just recently there was a paper. I haven't read the paper. I read a little synopsis on it, that the fundamental ability of humans to believe in conceptual frameworks that don't have tangible proof may be why we wiped every other hominid off the face of the earth, and that they were organizing the way that like animals organize on very fundamental, and somewhere along the way some genetic quirk gave us the ability to believe in God and his represent or whatever, and it allowed the degree of organization and common cause that allowed like groupings of larger numbers. And it's like, and that makes me really annoyed as like an atheist or whatever, because it's like, if that's true, you're never going to get rid of it. It's going to require some other that it's fundamental to our character as humans, and that's very disturbing to me. Potentially,
I think I'm needing to go.
Okay.
So on that non-optimistic note,
all right,
I invite you to close this up.
Oh, okay. Well, that was abrupt. But that's fine.
I'm famous for my transitions.
Okay, so just as general recap, I think that was a productive, good discussion.
Thank you.
And yeah, I guess my overall takeaway is that both of us have perspectives that would probably be considered outside the most generic sense of the norm, and that they're valuable for informing each other.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, maybe we can do this again on something more lighthearted. Maybe that might be entertaining.
All right.
All right. So yeah, this has been the Real Ramble number 5. I'm Mount Lake Moose. Mark was my guest today, and we just talked for I don't know how long. What was it? 2 hours? That was good. All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye.